Okay, today we are honored to have Brooke Anderson with us. She is really going to give us some really great information all about data and analyzing data. I'll let her introduce herself, but this is key to our assignment that we're going to be getting in the next couple weeks. And so I hopefully she'll answer any questions that you might have. But also write your questions down and you'll be able to send it to me. And then if we need to get any clarifications, that'll be great. So just remember that. So Brooke, excited that you're here. Can you go ahead and just introduce yourself and kind of what your job is?
You so much. I'm glad to be here. My name is Brooke Anderson, and I work for Jordan School District as a data scientist. So, a data scientist is someone who kind of wrangles all the different data from all the different systems that we're using in education and puts it all together, cleans it, extracts it, makes sure we have authoritative, clean, ongoing data sets where we can answer our pressing questions. And we can actually turn all of that different data into insights that we can use. Um, my background is in education. I actually started out as a classroom teacher at a middle school and a junior high, and I taught middle school, junior high English for about 13 years. And then I saw the role that data was playing in education, and that educators really were at a loss for how to interpret it, how to deal with it, even how to store it. And so I went back to school and I got my master's degree from the UEView Business School in information systems with an emphasis in data science, and then went to work for Jordan School District and now help build data systems for the district. And I also work on projects with the state with information systems. So it's just all day, data all day, and it's great.
I'm glad there's people like you. That data is great. I have to tell you, most school counselors don't go into school counseling for the data. And so
Right.
I always tell these my students, like, it's okay, we still need to know our data. That's what drives our practice. And so it's so important and it's kind of like the first step. We need to look at the data. So okay, so we're going to go through some questions. My first question is, what type of student data is like the most valuable, like to identify to help with either academics, social, or emotional like trends? And what data should we be checking on like regularly? Like we should be consistently looking at.
A great question because, as you said, a lot of people who want to work with kids are like, I don't want to work with data, I want to work with kids. But what we're really looking, we can't read kids' minds.
Mm,
We have to watch their behavior. And so all we're doing with data is we're looking for indicators of behavior and say, what are students demonstrating to us that they might need help or that there's something going on? And so the most important metrics that you're going to be following as a school counselor are those student demonstrations of either behavioral needs, like demonstrations of the number of referrals they get to the office, the number of absences they have, consecutive absences especially, um, and in terms of academic needs, how are they demonstrating that they can keep up with their classwork? Are they able to keep their grades up? Are they seeing a drop in their grades? Or, what does their citizenship in class look like? All of those things that, you're already collecting at your school are all key indicators.
mm,
Um, and in terms of emotional trends, you are likely collecting that data from students as well. Because if you're a counselor in a public school in Utah, you probably have students taking school climate kind of surveys where they talk about their feelings of self-efficacy or things like that. And that's essential data to track as a counselor because you want to know what is the state of our school in terms of how students are feeling about their school experience. And it's really key to be able to understand, what is the expectation? You're not going to have 100% of students reporting that they have high self-efficacy realistically.
mm.
So what kind of is normal and expected for that? And just getting, having that background information and being able to interpret, okay, are we at least in the normal range? Or are we seeing a real issue with some of our students where we're, well below where we'd expect them to be? And what can we do about that?
Yeah. I love that because you're pretty much saying like it's almost like we have to ask the question first. Like, what are we wanting to look at? And the cool thing is like then let's solidify it with data. Like let's really see what's going on in the classroom, in these students' heads to be able to figure them out and so how best to help them. So I love that. Going back to like so it's an emotional stuff. Like what data do we have? What can we pull from? I love that. Um, Now, I actually talked to you at a different time. We met each other through a different organization. But you kind of talked about, because I talked about analyzing data, and you said something about like finding patterns within data. Can you just talk about, when they're going to get their assignment, which is just like like a load of data, right? What should they be looking at? And talk to me about these patterns that we were talking about before.
Excellent. So, whenever you're handed a set of data, which happens a lot to us in education, we're just like, make sense of this data. Here it is. Um, the first thing you want to identify, is there some kind of standard that we're comparing ourselves to? Is there some kind of criteria that I need to evaluate against? Like for proficiency, we have criteria where we're saying, okay, we have an expectation for what skills to demonstrate to show proficiency. And for some of the areas that students are being tested in, like reading on grade level, there is actually a state level standard saying we want 70% of our students to meet this standard by the end of third grade, that kind of thing. So, where are you in relation to the expectation and the standard? So, that's the first question. And sometimes there is no standard that you know of. It's just, well, here's where we are. I don't know if that's good or bad. And in that case, what you want to try to find out is what's normal. Because for most cases, if we don't have a clear criteria that we're going for, we're just going to say normal is good.
Mhm.
And, as long as we're doing what's typical, then we're on the right path. So, and, that would be another good thing to compare against. And then, of course, if you have it, you would want to be able to say, okay, how does this look over time? For my group of kids that I have right now, how is this data looking in relation to where they were last year?
Mhm.
Has there been a big change? Is it consistent? That's also important context. So comparing it against a criteria or a standard, if there is one, comparing it against what might be normal, if that's known, and then comparing it against where students were previously,
Yeah.
comparing a point A against a point B. And then if you've got multiple years, that's even better because you can get an idea of what is normal over time for
Yeah.
your school. And then when you're looking at all of that, you really are looking for, just at the basic level, consistency and inconsistency. Consistency is often good news. When I meet with teacher teams and school teams to talk about like their student proficiency data over time, and I see that it is consistent over time, I think, well, you know what? I know you're not getting the same group of kids every year.
Mhm.
So the fact that you can get students to a consistent level of proficiency year by year, you've got some good stuff going on in your tier one instruction. That's really good news. If I'm seeing inconsistency over time, that's interesting. So there's some story there that we can kind of tease out. And I don't know what the story is just by looking at data. That's kind of where you start having to talk to people and say, what did happen? Or look for more data and ask more questions. But um, when we're looking at patterns, that's what I usually recommend people start with. Notice and describe what is consistent about what is happening, and then what is inconsistent and interesting about what's happening.
I love that. You said interesting. I think that's such a positive way to look at it because I have came across that before where it's just like something's just abnormal. But I like it says interesting because then we can even dive deeper sometimes into other data or compare it to like what else is this survey saying or what is this saying, right? Like what is the attendance even though we have this bad grades? And then I can like dive deeper. It's kind of like almost detective work. Maybe that's why you like it so much because it's like unsolving this mystery and
Hmm.
putting the pieces together, which is great. Um, Another question that we had is what limitations should they be aware of when interpreting data? Do you have anything that like just limitations within education that or maybe just school counselors will have with interpreting this data that they get?
I would say for a lot of the data that we get, my typical experience is that people try to put more limitations on it than they need to, especially with our student proficiency data. I see a lot of people like, I don't care for standardized tests. I don't want to talk about those. They are valid demonstrations of student learning, though, so we can't discard them
Mhm.
because that's the business that we are in, is to have students be able to demonstrate that they learned these basic skills that we're trying to teach them. So I would say, like, even if you don't fully understand the data, say, give it the benefit of the doubt and say, students are demonstrating something here.
Mhm.
What can we find out about our students based on this? Um, and when you're getting data, especially a report that's prepared for you from the state or from some other entity, you'd want to double check how everything is being defined and counted. For instance, from the state level, the accountability or the assessment data that gets published, there's almost always some business rules that have gone in that have eliminated some of the students from the summary.
Mhm.
Number one business rule that we usually use when summarizing assessment data or a lot of other data is, was the student enrolled a full academic year? So, especially if we're trying to have a discussion about the effectiveness of our instruction, we want to limit our data set to only the students who experienced a year of that instruction.
Mhm.
And then you could even set more business rules at your level if you wanted to. So when I meet with teachers, sometimes they want to say, well, I want the student to enroll all year, but I also only want to look at the kids who actually attended all year.
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
might take out some chronic absentees or set a threshold. Well, if they didn't experience or attend for this much of the instruction, we'll leave them out of the data for now. And we might look at them separately. And then it really depends on the question you're asking. You could even go further and say, okay, if I'm looking at the effectiveness of our instruction as a whole program, like grades 3 to 5, I'm going to limit it even further and say, who are the students who were enrolled from grades 3 through 5?
Mhm.
And we can say, if they were enrolled with us every single year for these 3 grade levels, what was the impact of our instruction?
Mhm.
So be thinking through, there's always going to be business rules around which kids are included in the data set and which kids
Mhm.
aren't.
Or not. Mhm. I think that's great. Well, I don't know if you know, Brooke, but our three domains in school counseling, and I'm mainly saying this just to remind the students too, that our three domains is academics, social emotional, and career. That's what school counselors are supposed to be covering. But I have to say, the huge part of our job is academics, even though it's supporting teachers, but it's also with like secondary schools and with credits and getting them on track for graduation and getting them across the line sometimes of graduation. It is in the front of our minds all the time. So, for the next question is where can I find which groups of students are most at risk for falling behind academically? It's always on our mind. What do you think is the key like points that we should be looking at all the time?
The number one thing I would recommend is to become very familiar with your school's early warning system. If you're a counselor in a public school in Utah, your school should have access to one specifically set up for you to be tracking attendance, academics, and social and emotional wellness,
Mhm.
and being able to flag students who are experiencing a decline or a sudden change in any of those indicators. There's a list, I think, in state law and in state board rule that specifies, okay, you've got to have an early warning system that does these things. And those things are in the list because they are major indicators of their ultimate academic outcomes. So I would, really dive into whatever system you have access to and see what is in there.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. And I've worked at a couple different school districts, and even though the platform might be different, I feel like it's still there. And we consistently as need to be diving in and at least seeing, to me, attendance, how they're doing academically. And just like you said before, comparing to how they've done from years past, right? And if something all of a sudden happens, that actually triggers me like something's going on in their like home life or their personal life. And then I start looking into other things, maybe going and talking to a teacher, maybe talking to the student, maybe calling home. Data is kind of like the start of something for me a lot of the time. And then it's unraveling the rest. So awesome. Okay, the next one is there are there early warning signs in the data that could help me intervene with struggling students sooner? What do you think are the key points of intervening? Like, what can we see way ahead of time? Because I think sometimes we don't dive deep in like state assessments or anything, but we just want to, find the needs of the kids early on as sooner as we can, so we can help do interventions for them later. So, what key ones do you think that we could look at the most?
So, if you're looking for students who are going to need the most help academically, I would definitely recommend looking at whatever literacy data you have for them from elementary
Literacy.
school. If they have struggled with learning how to read in elementary school, for a lot of kids, that struggle really affects everything else that they do
Mhm.
for the rest of their school career. So, those are kids that you might want to keep an eye on. But in terms of data that you're getting, pretty regularly as a school
Mhm.
counselor through your early warning system or SIS. Attendance is going to be a big one. Seeing students who have sudden changes in unexcused absences, especially consecutive unexcused absences, that would be a flag that you'd say, okay, what's going on with that student? They were attending and then suddenly they just miss, 3 days in a row,
Mhm.
and then we don't hear anything about it. Um, And then other early warning signs that would be kind of depend on, how your school is setting up their academic reporting and
Mhm.
how quickly you get access to academic data in your
Mhm.
SIS and in your
Mhm.
and in Panorama. If you can look at students who start missing assignments,
Mhm.
that's also a great
That's a good one.
indicator. If they are doing work and then they just stop doing their work.
Mhm.
And that could be one that if you don't have access to it in the SIS or through an early warning system, you can't see it on a screen, then, that might be one where you have a chance and you ask around, like, any kids who've just stopped who've fallen off on
Mhm.
their schoolwork lately, that would be, good to follow up on those students.
Yeah, I love that. And there are systems out there that kind of can give us those warning signs. But yeah, missing assignments or like looking at like I think first term, like especially like because there's usually a trend, so really catching them early on in the year is super important. And finding those students that might need help at the beginning. Okay, last question. What's the best way to share data with teachers, parents, administrators? So it's kind of clear, and actionable. Like, what can we do? Because I think, because again, we didn't go into school counseling to do data, but we want to share things with our stakeholders or share things with our students, what we're seeing. What's the best way to do that?
My first recommendation would be to be clear on what is your source of truth, and
Okay.
are you speaking with the same definitions that the principal is using, like your administration, your teachers, are you all defining things the same way?
Mhm.
So when you say a student is chronically absent, does it mean the same thing as when the front office says they're chronically absent? When
Mhm.
you say a student isn't proficient, does it mean the same thing as when a teacher says it? Like, we want to all be on the same page and saying the same things. And then, so, be clear about your definitions and ideally be working from the same source of truth on what is going on with students.
Good point.
And then if there's a way to visualize it really clearly and simply, that's ideal, is to give people a visual of how a student is doing overtime. And then whatever you're describing, be able to describe it in a clear way without using any jargon. I'm saying the word proficiency because I'm talking to people who work in an academic environment. That may not be a term I would use right up front with a parent. I would describe the discrete skills I would expect to see from a student. I'm going to say, like, I would really expect, your daughter to be able to read aloud fluently and without making a lot of errors and be able to read aloud without skipping any lines on the page. That's how I would
Mhm.
describe it to a parent and say, I expect them to be proficient in reading on grade level because those terms aren't meaningful to a parent.
Yes. Yeah, I love that point. Because we've all been there. Like when I even go to the doctor, right? And they just start talking, I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And if we're really trying to explain it, I think clarity is very important. And it's an opportunity to build that trust. If they left the office and they were just like, I didn't understand half the things she said, I failed then, right? And I want them to feel like they can come back to me. So. Okay, well, anything else that you think? Oh, sorry, this will be the last question. So, I know that you've worked with school counselors probably when you were a teacher, and I don't know how much interaction you have with them now, but any other advice that you would give us new school counselors, right, as they go out? And remember your first and second years of teaching, and it's that bad for us school counselors too. So they're going to head out, and what advice would you give them with data, with anything data and assessment?
Yeah. Ask so many questions, and never be afraid to say you don't know, because the process of asking the question and having people explain, it helps you and them.
Mhm.
So the more we can just verbalize our understanding of the data that we're talking about, the better.
Okay. That's really good advice. And I hope they take it from you. because I do think we want to show competency, right, when we get out there. But the thing is, we all realize we're new, and this is such a key thing in our job. I love that, but this is a whole class because it shows the importance of data and assessment. Just because it uncovers things, uncovers just like we were talking about before. As a detective, you're just uncovering things about students and seeing who best we could help out in a timely manner. So. Okay, thank you so much, Brooke. If they have
Thank
any other
you.
questions, I'll have them email me and then we can pass them on. But this has been very, very great conversation. So,
All
okay,
right. Thank you so
thank
much.
you.
Bye bye.